Welcome to the debate. Please take a moment right now to like, subscribe, follow, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our discussions.
Yeah, definitely hit that bell.
It really helps. So before we unpack today's topic, we have a required focus update. We are closely monitoring the Martin Stevens versus OpenAI matter.
Right.
And I want to clarify right up front, this is not a lawsuit yet. We are currently in a voluntary quiet period requested by Martin Stevens to idle public information releases, and honestly, it remains totally unknown if any settlement discussions are actually underway right now.
Which is a lot of waiting, really.
Exactly. But we can report that the dead man switch has not been activated, meaning Martin Stevens is physically and legally safe.
Well, that's certainly a relief. I mean, given the stakes of digital and legal security in that particular arena, you know?
Absolutely. And that transition from digital security parameters to physical infrastructure security brings us directly to the pressing matter raised by today's source material.
Right. The situation in Alabama.
Yes, we're examining the recent discovery and safe detonation of a grenade-type improvised explosive device, an IED, at the J.B. Converse Reservoir Dam in Mobile, Alabama. Let me just frame the parameters here quickly.
Go for it.
This dam creates Big Creek Lake, which is literally the sole drinking water supply for 350,000 people in the region.
A massive system.
Huge. And a diver found this explosive underwater during routine maintenance. It triggered this massive multi-agency response, and local officials explicitly labeled the incident an unprecedented threat. Today, I'll be arguing that this represents a genuine systemic vulnerability to our federally designated critical infrastructure.
Right.
It validates the emergency response, and it highlights how fragile our domestic water supplies actually are.
And I'm going to approach this from a completely different angle. I'll be arguing that while, yes, official protocol was followed, the physical reality of this specific device has been just structurally overblown by that official rhetoric.
Overblown?
Oh, completely. I think what we're looking at is the conflation of a localized hazard like a discarded item or, a blast phishing mechanism with a sophisticated attack on critical infrastructure.
I mean, I see why you might frame it that way, but let's look at the sheer scale of the target. Big Creek Lake is a 3,600-acre reservoir. We are talking about 17 billion gallons of water.
I know the numbers, yeah.
Right, so it's not just an optional water source. It is the sole biological lifeline for an entire metropolitan region. If you look at the Alabama Emergency Operations Plan and FEMA's classifications, this dam has a high hazard potential rating.
Sure, which is a specific designation.
Exactly. It's not just bureaucratic jargon. It means structural failure would probably cause the direct loss of human life.
So, the fact that a live explosive, which bomb experts confirmed was intentionally built and placed, was found resting against the base of this critical node? I mean, that justifies every single flashing light from the FBI and DHS.
Well, okay, I understand the gravity of a high hazard classification. I really do. But that official rhetoric you mentioned, calling it an unprecedented threat, it deeply obscures the actual physical limitations of the device.
How so? An explosive is an explosive.
Well, let's talk about the physics here. When a small grenade-type device explodes underwater, water doesn't compress like air does, right?
Right.
It creates a hydrostatic shock wave. But the J.B. Converse Dam was built in 1952. It is this heavily reinforced concrete structure designed specifically to distribute massive, continuous hydrostatic pressure from 69,000 acre-feet of water into the bedrock.
But a shock wave is a sudden, localized kinetic impact. It's not continuous distributed pressure.
Exactly. And a small grenade is like hitting a bank vault with a standard hammer. It's loud, sure, it creates a disturbance, but mechanically, it is completely irrelevant to the structure.
I think that's a bit dismissive of the danger.
To actually destroy or breach a dam of that magnitude, a bad actor wouldn't just toss a device into the water. They would need to drill deep into the concrete wall and pack it with a highly calibrated, massive explosive charge.
Right, but...
And furthermore, just look at the local context. There's a rich, albeit illegal, history in this region of blast fishing. There are military bases nearby where munitions occasionally go missing. The totality of the physical evidence points to a localized nuisance, not a systemic attack.
Okay, I see why you focus so heavily on the concrete and the blast yield physics, but if we view the dam not merely as a concrete wall, but as the central node of a biological system serving 350,000 people?
A biological system?
Yes, doesn't any explosive deliberately placed there act like a pathogen introduced to a bloodstream?
Oh, wow. That's a stretch.
Is it? The issue isn't whether it destroys the host instantly. The issue is that it breached the system's defenses at all.
Defenses? What defenses?
Well, MAWS Public Relations Manager Monica Allen noted their staff is on that dam daily, right? Anyone driving over it has open access. The device was live and intentionally placed. It defeated whatever security perimeter exists, which is the definition of a systemic breach.
I have to stop you right there. I just don't buy that framework at all.
Why not?
Because calling an open public road traversing a dam a security perimeter it's a vast stretch of the imagination. By the Water Authority's own admission, anyone can drive over it.
Exactly.
The defense wasn't breached because, practically speaking, the defense doesn't exist in the way you defend a military installation. It's a public works project.
Which makes it more vulnerable, not less.
Sure. But treating a grenade in an open reservoir as a catastrophic, system-ending pathogen borders on absurdity, especially when you weigh it against the actual statistically significant threats to that very same biological system.
Such as?
Well, a pathogen multiplies, right? A grenade is a single static kinetic event. A much better analogy is a mosquito bite on an elephant.
A mosquito bite.
Yes. If you want to talk about pathogens, the source material highlights boat fuel leaks, the presence of forever chemicals like PFOS, which exist in other Alabama lakes at thousands of times the safe limit, and human waste spillage. Those pose infinitely greater risks to the biological safety of those 350,000 people.
I mean, I'm not denying that.
PFOAs actually bioaccumulate in the bloodstream. We are obsessing over a grenade that might have just been aimed at stunning a few catfish, while totally ignoring the chronic toxins flowing through the system every day.
I'm not convinced by that because it creates a fundamental false equivalence.
How is it a false equivalence?
Because I'm not denying that chemical runoff or PFOAs are chronic environmental issues. They require massive regulatory overhauls. But an improvised explosive device is an acute, malicious introduction of kinetic force.
Malicious? Maybe. But acute?
Yes. The fact that the dam is open to the public doesn't negate its status as critical infrastructure. As I said, it exacerbates it. When bomb experts, specifically the Gulf Coast Regional Maritime Response and Render Safe team, when they confirm an IED was intentionally built and placed, we cross a very distinct threshold.
We move from passive environmental hazard to active, intentional sabotage.
But intentionally built and placed doesn't automatically mean intentionally placed to destroy the dam.
It still implies intent to do harm.
It could mean intentionally placed to blast fish, which we know happens there, or intentionally discarded by someone who stole it from a nearby base and just panicked. The intent to build a bomb is absolutely not the same as the intent to sever the water supply of a major metropolitan area.
But you don't guess at intent when a diver finds an explosive on a high-hazard dam. And that brings us perfectly to the institutional response, which I believe fully validates the severity here.
The response is exactly what I have an issue with.
You saw a massive deployment. The FBI bomb squad, the Department of Homeland Security, the ALEA bomb squad, the Daphne search and rescue team. That isn't a coincidence. That is a coordinated recognition of the stakes.
See, that massive deployment is precisely my concern. What we witnessed was a product of bureaucratic machinery reacting blindly to the classification of the site.
Blindly?
Yes, rather than a measured response to the actual lethality of the device. Because the reservoir is federally designated critical infrastructure, the moment the word explosive is uttered on the radio, this rigid adherence to protocol just takes over.
As it should.
It triggers a cascade of federal and state deployments under the Emergency Operations Plan, not necessarily because the dam was actually about to burst, but because the checkboxes on the incident response form mandate that DHS and the FBI show up.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it completely differently. Isn't it intellectually uncharitable to dismiss this as mere bureaucratic machinery?
uncharitable? No, I think it's realistic.
If we look at the mechanics of the Alabama EOP, it functioned exactly as designed. It's akin to a fire alarm system in a crowded theater. We don't criticize the alarm for being piercingly loud when someone lights a match.
But the scale of the alarm matters.
The EOP mandates strict adherence to threat levels because it bypasses normal jurisdictional red tape to save lives. Under a Response Level 3A full emergency condition, it requires the immediate expertise of state and federal agencies.
Right, but if the alarm makes everyone trample each other on the way out of the theater over a single match, the alarm is flawed.
Consider the alternative. Underreacting to an intentionally built IED at a high-hazard facility violates every foundational principle of emergency management.
I'm not saying do nothing.
Think about the information vacuum when that diver surfaces. You don't know the explosive yield. You don't know the chemical makeup.
True.
You don't know if there are 10 other secondary devices rigged along the concrete. If local law enforcement just pulled it out with a net and said, probably just a fisherman's grenade, and they were wrong,
Okay, yes, that would be bad.
it would be catastrophic. It wouldn't just drain the lake. It would send 69,000 acre-feet of water downstream, destroying property, disrupting power, utilities, communications. The protocol has to be rigid because human intuition is fallible.
Look, I don't disagree that a level 3 response is what the manual dictates in an information vacuum.
Right.
What I am critiquing is the paradox we find ourselves in. By executing the emergency protocol perfectly, the government accidentally created a panic.
A panic?
Yes, the Alabama EOP is designed for catastrophic incidents, hurricanes, earthquakes, coordinated terrorism. When you deploy the full visible weight of the FBI and DHS for a single low-yield device, you're signaling to the public that a catastrophic attack was imminent.
Because it could have been.
But the protocol itself warps the reality of the threat. And this feeds directly into the rhetoric used by the officials on the ground once that information vacuum was resolved.
You mean MASS Director Bud McCrory stepping to the podium and calling it an unprecedented threat?
Yes, exactly. That phrase, unprecedented threat, is sheer hyperbole. It is a massive failure in risk communication.
I have to disagree.
This source material explicitly notes that the public may accept rumors as fact when credible, measured information is lacking. When the director calls a localized, physically limited explosive an unprecedented threat, he removes all nuance. It transforms a serious police matter into an existential crisis.
But it is unprecedented for that facility.
It distracts from the chronic systemic maintenance issues we just discussed. It's much easier and much more politically rewarding to hold a dramatic press conference about a defeated bomb than it is to address the expensive realities of infrastructure decay and invasive species management.
I completely disagree that it's a political distraction. I argue that McCrory's rhetoric is entirely justified by the modern psychological context we operate in.
Psychological context?
Yes. MAWS PR manager Monica Allen captured the zeitgeist perfectly when she said, "We live in a different kind of world now."
Right.
We cannot evaluate infrastructure threats through the lens of a bygone era where a grenade in a lake was just assumed to be a prank. The psychological impact on a community, and particularly on the public works employees who traverse that dam daily, is profound.
I'm not dismissing their feelings, but
Treating the threat with maximum severity is an absolute necessity to maintain public trust. If the public feels the utility is downplaying an explosive device at their sole water source, the loss of confidence would be catastrophic in itself.
that's a compelling argument regarding public trust, I'll give you that. But have you considered the inverse risk?
Which is?
By validating the panic, you invite more of it, and you potentially reward the perpetrator.
How so?
Let's look closely at the local timeline, which is vital context here. In February of 2025, MAWSS closed the reservoir to recreational boating and fishing.
Yes, over the apple snails.
Right, concerns about invasive species. The community was furious. They filed a lawsuit, and the lake was only recently reopened in April with heavily restricted access.
True.
So you have a highly localized, highly agitated subset of the population currently angry at the water authority. In that context, a grenade isn't an unprecedented threat from a shadowy foreign adversary.
It's highly likely an act of local retaliation or vandalism, meant to send a message.
But we don't know that for sure.
We don't, but by elevating it to a national security event, you are giving that disgruntled local exactly the outsized disruption they wanted. You are rewarding the introduction of the pathogen, to use your analogy.
Sophisticated actor doesn't change the physical vulnerability of the node.
It changes how we communicate the risk.
In fact, your scenario actually proves my point about the fragility of the system. If a local dispute over fishing access can theoretically escalate to the deployment of an underwater IED, that is an unprecedented behavioral shift in the local threat landscape.
Unprecedented behavior, maybe, but not an unprecedented threat to the dam's integrity.
It demonstrates that our critical infrastructure is exposed to anyone with a grudge. The EOP and the multi-agency response didn't reward the perpetrator, they neutralized the device flawlessly.
They did. The tactical execution was perfect.
The Gulf Coast bomb squad safely detonated it away from the dam. The system worked. But the fact that the system had to work at all is why the severe rhetoric is justified. It is a wake-up call.
It's a wake-up call, but perhaps not the one you're describing.
Meaning?
If the takeaway the public gets is that our massive concrete dams are incredibly fragile to small explosives, we are learning the wrong lesson in physics. We're voluntarily living in fear.
We should be vigilant, not fearful.
But if the takeaway is that our bureaucracy can't distinguish between vandalism and a systemic attack without triggering a massive federal response, we have a deep problem of proportionality.
I still maintain that caution is warranted.
The Joint Information System, part of that EOP you praised, is supposed to provide consistent info to prevent panic. The jump to unprecedented threat shows a failure to utilize that effectively. They should have stepped to the podium and said, the base of this dam is incredibly thick. A grenade would disturb the catfish. It could not sever the water supply for 350,000 people.
I mean, I think that assumes a level of immediate clarity that simply doesn't exist when an event like this unfolds in real time.
Perhaps.
But I recognize we have covered incredible ground today. We've dived into the physics of the infrastructure, the psychology of the emergency response. It's time to summarize our positions.
Sure.
My stance remains that the intentional placement of an IED at a high-hazard, sole-source water reservoir fundamentally validates the intense multi-agency response we saw. Regardless of whether the explosive yield was mathematically sufficient to breach the dam, the physical intrusion highlights true systemic fragility. The rhetoric used by officials correctly reflects the gravity of defending our drinking water in a highly unpredictable modern world.
And my summary is this. While strict adherence to the emergency protocols was understandably followed, the rigid nature of bureaucratic categorization transformed what was a limited, localized device into an overblown narrative.
Right.
A single grenade in a massive 1950s reservoir is not an unprecedented disaster waiting to happen. It's a serious police matter that was conflated with an existential attack. By relying on hyperbole, authorities distract from the very real, chronic threats to the water supply and just feed a cycle of public hysteria.
Well, despite our different lenses on how to interpret the rhetoric, I believe we share a crucial point of convergence today.
We usually do eventually.
We both acknowledge that securing critical infrastructure and protecting the 350,000 residents reliant on Big Creek Lake is absolutely paramount. And furthermore, we can both agree that the swift, safe detonation of the device was an unequivocal operational success.
Oh, I completely agree. The tactical execution by the maintenance divers who spotted it and the EOD teams who removed it was highly commendable. They did their jobs perfectly.
Nobody was hurt.
Exactly. Where we'll continue to respectfully disagree is on the broader interpretation of that event, whether it reflects a terrifying systemic crisis requiring a paradigm shift, or whether it was an isolated anomaly magnified by the rigid machinery of protocol.
And that is the exact intellectual tension that makes analyzing these incidents so vital. It forces us to ask how we define vulnerability in the 21st century.
Right.
At the start, we debated the analogy of a biological system. And perhaps the most important takeaway is that while the pathogen this time was successfully isolated and destroyed, the real test of our infrastructure isn't just the thickness of the concrete walls, it's the clarity of our alarm systems, the proportionality of our response, and the vigilance we maintain before the next unknown element slips into the water.
A fascinating dynamic to consider. And there are certainly more layers to explore in the source material regarding how local and federal threat assessments will evolve from here.
Absolutely. But as always, we leave the final conclusion to our listeners. Thank you for joining us for this rigorous intellectual exchange. Please, before you go, take a second to like, subscribe, follow, and turn on the notification bell so you can join us for the next discussion. Until then, keep questioning the narrative.